You know, I've never really, I've never really been a big fan of studio television, um, all the morning TV shows and Strictly Come Dancing and all those type of things, right? Not where they always get these studio audiences and fans, to just clapping. It's like a next step of crowd control. It's getting big, large groups of people to not only kind of do what you want them to do, but listen to everything you say and also to like what you basically tell them or dictate to them, right? And even like it and enjoy it. It's a step further than, football stadium crowds just watching a game. It's actually, this whole idea of audience participation. But the celebrities, right? Obviously, the celebrities themselves like their jobs, right? They like their jobs, they like the excitement, they like the entertainment, and they like the fans and so forth, right? But what I've always found is that, celebrities seem to be easily controlled by the state because, the state can focus its attention on them, right? And also can kind of like almost, they've got a lot to worry about, basically, right? And when television was, controlling the main narrative a lot more, I think they did a lot of study on celebrities and how they can affect their opinions, right? And the introduction of YouTube and the idea of YouTube where more people become celebrities and more people have fans and followers and everyone's more concerned about their kind of, safety and well-being, but not also just that, just kind of like the influential aspects of it, right? But celebrities are mainly set up to be influencers, not the influenced, right? But the thing is, when they had the mainstream TV only, there was a large portion of the public that didn't fall for the TV thing, that didn't turn up and go to studio audiences, that wasn't into all that was kind of free and independent, right? And they weren't ever going to get those people to do all those things, right? But the thing, what I've found now is that all your people, for example, who didn't turn out to vote, or all the people who kind of like didn't have anything to do with, all those mainstream TV shows and that, the more independent people, right? Which was a large number of them, a large percentage of them. Now, since you can go on YouTube and have alternative interests from the mainstream narrative, people are following someone, right? Or watching someone or following certain videos, like now with, for example, the whole Tommy Robinson campaign, or, for example, with Russell Brand. It could be anything, or Extinction Rebellion. So they've managed to kind of capture on net pretty much everyone now who's following something rather than wasn't following anything, or just had their own completely and totally independent life and just got on with their own thing. And they end up becoming followers of something or someone, right? And therefore you end up, rather than having a portion of the population who are completely free and independent, they're not. And you manage to get these other niche categories, right? And people following the niche categories when they weren't actually following anything at all, particularly when, there's all these wars stirred up and immigrants stirred up, and there are a lot of public outrages politically. It's provoking people to follow something or engage with something. I mean, some people just give up with Facebook and YouTube and just condemn it and say that, they've never felt better than when they just didn't even do social media. But I think there's probably a lot more of the population spread now that are somehow engaged and following someone or something rather than not following anyone or anything, right? And it doesn't have to be the mainstream anymore. They don't need you to follow, the Strictly Come Dancing shows or the Jeremy Vine Morning TV or the Loose Women or whatever mainstream show they've got on Top of the Pops, because now they've got something for everyone, right? And what that does is they can then apply the model which they've had when they had experimented on the main celebrities, but use it for all of these other different minor focuses and attentions and groups and followings, which they've now managed to get people netted into. And I think they're going to use a strategy of that, which is why they wanted the digital ID, because now they've got everyone using the mobile phones and putting the information on the mobile phones and following or watching something or some, whether it's one of the immediate issues that we've got or whether you're ignoring those immediate issues, that's been advocated on Russell Brand or on, GB News or whatever it is, right? And they have you. I mean, even if you're not watching any of that mainstream stuff, and even if you're not engaging in the whole political flare that's arisen, you're still getting, like, you might like, the countryside, or you might like, farming or something like that, and then you end up being a fan or follower of things like farming channels or farming sites, right? And once they've sort of captured everyone into that model, they fall into it somewhere or other, right? Unless you completely and totally abandon social media and smartphones, but they're highly addictive, right? And it's the whole idea and model of the digital ID, which we have got an identity in a digital form now with a mobile phone, right? I don't think it's never been to do with a card. It's always to do with a mobile phone. So that's how they've got everyone, So I think they planned it all along. It's not just the fact that Mark Zuckerberg suddenly appeared from nowhere. The BBC publicised and advocated Mark Zuckerberg because they talked about it on the radio. No one even went on Facebook. It was actually the BBC. Mark Zuckerberg's fortune is primarily to do with the BBC, right? In England, if the BBC had not mentioned Mark Zuckerberg, I wouldn't have gone on and knew about Facebook, They actually told everyone, the BBC told everyone, go on Facebook, right? And they did, and this is what's happened. And then it affected, everyone's administration, groups, all these things. So it's the BBC's actual fault that we went on there. So they're part of this. Obviously in America, but the Americans probably had the equivalent of the BBC telling people to go on Facebook. So Mark Zuckerberg's been given his money. He's been given the fame and money. He didn't just think of that website, and the BBC said, hey, everyone in England, go on there, right? And they did, right? And that's how it happened. So Mark Zuckerberg, he sat at a table with Donald Trump saying, I made 80 billion or whatever. No, he didn't. The BBC literally, it's like someone, it's like winning the lottery, right? If someone's walking down the street and just a random person comes up to you and says, hey, do you want a, recording contract, or do you want to write children's books, something like that? Do you want a deal, and we'll make all your ideas for you, right? It's like that. So I don't accredit Zuckerberg, really, for much, because, there's lots of different... Why was it just Facebook, And why have all the other sites been mysteriously suppressed and people don't go on them as much? There must have been some what were as good or better. But anyway, this I wanted to talk about this list of human rights, okay? These are from the Human Rights Act and from this whole European Convention of Human Rights that we adopted, right? The human rights are fundamental freedoms and protections inherent in all people. But what I'm finding is when people use these human rights and when they use them in courts and talk about them, they're very vague, and a lot of them can't be right, because some of them say that you've got freedom of expression, but you haven't got complete freedom of expression because of the laws, right? And as they're bringing in more and more and more and more laws, then you've got less and less and less freedom of expression, right? Like a lot of these comedians now are getting criticised. So comedians don't have as much freedom of expression, but all these clauses claim that you've got all these rights. Now, what I realised is, and this is actually quite important, the European Convention on Human Rights, this list of freedoms, right? Whoever was the mastermind behind it and whoever was the strategist behind it, and the way that they're taking us now with the plan, the strategy, this mechanisms of implementation, which Tony Blair is all over, right? These mechanisms of implementation that Tony Blair's been talking about with his digital ID and plans and that, the only way that it can go with the current trend of the type of laws they're bringing in, like, you can't pray outside abortion clinics, or you can't tell these type of jokes, or when you're submitting e-petitions, it's not up to the standards, and you're not allowed to communicate or talk with them to explain it, right? So you can't, you don't have the right to be understood, okay? The way they're going with it at the moment is that there aren't going to be any of these left. And this is my belief now, and this is my actual opinion. I think that this always was from the start, right, a strategic list of things that they wanted to abolish, right? I think they wanted to abolish these things. I don't believe now that they made up this list of things and said, hey, these are the freedoms that humankind must have. What I think this list is more like Tony Blair and his strategists sitting down and thinking, right, what is going to get in the way of and obstruct our master plan of digital ID and control, right? Basically people's freedoms and democracy, because with freedoms and democracy, you can't have the degrees and amount of control that they want, because it's the levels and depth of regulatory laws and policies which they're wanting to implement will not leave these freedoms. They're actually opposing them, and particularly, democracy, because if you have more and more democracy, you've got less and less corporate policy and less money controlling things, and more votes controlling things, and not money on the table when it comes to planning and building decisions. And you get, juries put back in civil courts, right, in local areas, and even in the local council. Because, like, for example, the assizes, which was the Crown Court, basically the assizes was the Crown Court going around on the circuits, right? And the justices travelling around the country. That's where you were just getting permission to build houses from, right? And they sat with a jury. And it wasn't like a local council until they started getting like a fixed permanent mayor with aldermen and a charter for your local town, and then it became a city. And that's when you had this more of a fixed system, right? And you didn't, and in the 1850s through the mid-1800s, they got away with juries in civil cases, which would include in the council, or in the equivalent of the council with the mayor and alderman, because mayor and alderman had juries, which you can see that in the William Penn trial, right? So we, the people, don't make any decisions in local planning and building matters, really. It's down to the councillors, but the councillors are meant to represent us, but they don't. They represent political parties, and what a lot of the Big Brother Watch type websites are calling it a papers please, council, or a papers please government. It's like putting money on the table. So let's just read this list of human rights, right? So here's the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So they're trying to get rid of this. This is, you've got the right to life, not the right to get rid of life. So they're trying to put through this assisted suicide bill, right? They're trying to put through these assisted suicide acts so that, you can get rid of your life, or that judges have got the right to end lives. So that's not the right to life, is it? That's actually trying to cut into the right to life, or even try to persuade you from wanting to live, and actually giving people the right to take away life, right? So that they're trying to get rid of that one. Then you've got freedom from slavery and torture. Right, but what even is the definition of slavery? Well, the definition of slavery is manacles and chains, which shows a physical restriction on something you can or can't do, like simply scratching your head. If you're chained up, you don't have the freedom to scratch your head, right? Or if you're in, like old-fashioned medieval stocks, you don't have the freedom to even move or walk anywhere except, just be in one place, right? Or if you're locked in your house. The idea of prison is slavery because, even if you've done something wrong, the model of it is that, for whatever reason, you're not allowed to go anywhere or do anything, right? Now, what Tony Blair's doing with the digital ID and what everyone knows is that they want to be able to take freedoms away, okay? Take away your freedom to go where you want, when you want, and all these other models like those 20-minute stays. Where's the freedom in a 20-minute stay? There's no freedom to move freely. You've got to move to this new grid system, right? And then, if you're not allowed to go anywhere unless you have this digital ID, or if you're registered with this or that, but it's even more enforceable than it ever was. But they're adding more and more restrictions and more things that you can and can't do, right? So the model is it's like, they're calling it digital prison or digital manacles. So that's against, it's less freedom. We can absolutely guarantee and safely say that direction of implementation is less freedom. And they're even admitting it, though. They're even saying, well, we have to sacrifice some freedoms. Well, so what they're saying is, by saying you'll have to sacrifice some freedoms, that's a trade-off, so it's less freedom. So again, on this list, the second item down, we can include that in something they're trying to get rid of as well, right? And as for torture, well, I'm trying to submit petitions, right, to the petitions committee in Parliament, and I'm putting really intelligent petitions. I'm putting a lot of good evidence in there. And they're saying they don't understand it. I'm posing a question. I want the government to. I'm making a claim, right? You know what a claim is when you see one. Someone is. Well, that's what the word claim is. They're claiming that they are right on this thing. When you set out a claim that there's something that you're right about, then clearly you're challenging, right, the current view, right? If you're saying, I think that I've got the right to walk down the road, then you're suggesting or posing that someone or something says that you can't, right? Let's take that example for the abortion clinic prayers, right? With the abortion clinic prayers, right, you're not allowed to pray in an area around an abortion clinic, right? So if you drafted out some writing which said, I believe that I can pray outside an abortion clinic, and then underneath it, you set out evidence to substantiate that claim, right? Now, what the petitions committee are doing is saying, we don't know what you're asking. We don't know what you're asking for. Well, look, right, if someone says, right, I believe I've got the right to stand outside an abortion clinic, you're challenging the government's claim that you can't, or you're challenging the law that says that you can't with evidence to support it. So what are you asking? Well, you're wanting the government to assess your claim and either agree with it or disagree with it. And that's the thing. So you're wanting them to update their opinion and interpretation or policy, right? It's a no-brainer. It's not complicated. And, there's another way of presenting my petitions, which is like, I pose a question, like, why is the government policy, using this clause, right? So that's the question. So you want an answer from the government. Now, the thing is, when you collect 10,000 signatures, right, they give an answer. So when they give an answer, right, then you're allowed to put a question. If you frame it as a question, right, does the below evidence prove that we actually have got a right to, pray outside abortion clinics? Then what are you asking the government? You're asking the government to either agree or disagree with that statement, right? And if they agree with it, then you know that you actually can do it, right? Because you proved it with the evidence, right? You might challenge the law, the legislation they've made, right, and say that the legislation is incorrect, or it's not sufficient, or it's not adequate, And this is, we're going to get onto this probably in a minute, when there's freedom of expression, right? The freedom of creative expression. But this current petitions committee is saying that you've got to express yourself or write something how they want you to write it. But that's not being creative or using poetry or using creative writing or anything, right? There were lots of strange petitions and wording, like in Scotland when they talk about, you know, grouse hunting or candour and things like that. There was some very poetic and peculiar wording on petitions. It's all there was some stylish petitions, and sometimes I don't understand what they mean, right? But I have to look it up, right? They still published them. The petitions committee published them. I didn't know what the word candour mean. I had to look it up and read it, right? But it's the way it's framed, you know, and they're not they're not wanting to accept different creative styles of writing, which are in English, right? They're in English. It's in the English language. Right to a fair trial. Well, they're definitely getting rid of the right to a fair trial. So right to a fair trial is a really important one because firstly, they've got Brian Leveson, who is trying to scrap juries, right? He wants to get rid of juries, and Shabana Mahmood, reckoning that the government can't afford them. You know, if you get a jury trial, you've got more chance of getting a fair trial. And also, they're doing all this. Keir Starmer wants to do this respect orders thing. And a lot of these processes whereby they can issue orders and fines on you without actually you going to court and without you actually giving any evidence. A lot of, like, even the terrorism laws, some of those terrorism laws don't allow you to have a lawyer present, you know, or counsel. That surely is cutting into the right of a fair trial, you know, and fair representation, right? Right to a fair trial and presumption of innocence. Well, they've removed that. They've already removed the presumption of innocence because even with driving offences, you know, once they've got the photograph, you know, there's not really anything you can do to prevent the inevitability of you getting your driving licence endorsed or taken away, right? Unless you go in there and, you know, you put a defence in, but it's now that they've got these photographs and things like that, it is being regarded as that you have committed the crime unless you prove that you haven't. And that's how they're doing it. But they're doing this now with fines and things like that. The basis of a fine, right, if you park your car, right, and the traffic warden puts a ticket on it, and he's actually issued you the fine, right? So at that point, you've actually immediately got a fine to pay, right? You have to, at that point, you owe them money, right? And you haven't had a judge and you haven't had a jury, right? It's like you actually will pay this money now, but you've got the right to contest it and you can go for a fair trial, but there is no presumption of innocence at all, right? When you when a traffic warden walks past and when he puts a ticket on, there's no presumption of innocence at all, right? At that point, you actually owe money, right? You answer something to a court with the accusation of that, you know, you didn't pay the fine. It's like, you know, he's not, you know, it's like he said that you have done the offence. Like, the position surely is that you did not pay for the parking. And therefore, why is he asking money from you? Because, you know, he's adjudged and now believes that you owe money, right? It's not like you getting, you know, if you want to see as a summon to court, right? Mr. Smith is accusing you of, you know, owing him £10. And then we need to hear from both sides, right? It isn't actually an order to pay the money. I think that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is it isn't a note from the court that you must pay Mr. Smith that money. It's actually asking you to go there so they can find out what happened in order to make a decision and judgment if you owe him it or not. But you're summoned there to go there. And I think the difference is with a traffic warden, he's actually said that, right, you know, I'm asking for that money, right? He's not asking you to go and prove that you did or didn't owe the parking money. He's actually asking for the parking money. As far as he's concerned, you know, and that's actually, you know, he's made, you know, a judgment and decision has actually been made, right? And they're wanting the money from you. When you get a civil court claim from a plaintiff, it doesn't say that you have to pay this money. It says that someone wants to take you to court to prove that you owe them the money, right? Because I don't think you can't pay the money, right? Unless you actually immediately, I think even if you admit it, you know, you plead that you owe the money, you know, I think that you've still got to enter the thing. That there is a distinction between it. I know that if you go on a criminal case and if you plead guilty, you don't get a jury and you don't actually put a case of evidence, you get a sentence. But you actually got to enter a plea and go into the court. They're not actually saying that, you know, the police reported you for a crime and you've got to do, you know, community service or whatever, 100 hours community service. By the way, if you want to contest this, then come into court. I don't think they are actually sort of doing that with the speeding tickets, you know. But this is the thing. In Magna Carta, the sheriff is not allowed to accept pleas from you. He's not allowed to accept a plea, right? You've got to go to a court, particularly when it was a felony, right? And it's got to be a court of record. The police can't actually just make a judgment and issue an order out if it was a felony without it being a court of record. And that's when you're supposed to have the right to a fair trial, you know? So there is some differentiation between that. So the presumption, we definitely are getting rid of this presumption of innocence. And I know that there's a lot of technology now taking photographs, but this is the thing. The law is not necessarily 100% always on the physical reality of it, the physical facts. Like, you know, you walk down the street, right? So you walk down that street, so that's a crime or whatever, or, you know, it's like, what was the intention of the human? You know, did you intend to? On certain laws, if you didn't know that you weren't supposed to go down there, or if you did it innocently or whatever, it's to do with, there's a subjective aspect to it, and the subjective aspect decides on whether you're actually innocent or guilty. Not just that, you know, the physical proof is that you walk down there, because that doesn't prove the subjective intention, right? The subjective intention, you know, it is more in the mind and in the person's, you know, conscience, right? So, but they're wanting to try and make it so that every time they get a photograph or video or physical evidence, you're automatically kind of charged or have to pay a fine or something, unless you go and defend it or prove it, which is kind of like, he's taking away the presumption of innocence on the conscience part of it, right? Because there's a presumption, the presumption of innocence is partly in the conscience side of it and not always in the physical part. So they're definitely trying to get rid of that, so that, you know, they're not interested what your intention was. They're not interested in what your belief was, or knowledge or understanding. They're not interested in the conscience. In fact, I don't think they're interested in the spirit or the human or the conscience. And that's what we get when they're taking away, you know, this whole the whole basis of the fact that the judges and courts aren't meant to negotiate or persuade or offer rewards if you plead guilty or if you give evidence, because that is in respect to persons, right? In respect to persons and in respect to individuals' conscience. And that's what the judge's oath says. The judge says they won't do anything for favour or fear, you know, like making you scared that, you know, if you enter a certain plea, that you might get a more severe penalty if you plead not guilty when you think you're not guilty, because you're scared or frightened. So there are a lot of issues with the conscience side of it. They've cut straight into the conscience, that they're not meant to go into the area of your own conscience on when you're making a decision on your plea, right? They're not allowed to do that, but they've gone into that, and then also they're completely disregarding the conscience when and just ignoring it when they're getting photographs and saying there is no conscience, like, you know, you physically did this or that, here's a photograph, and, you know, you're guilty. So this right to fair trial and presumption of innocence, that they're trying to get rid of trials. Freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and expression. So e-petitions at the moment is absolutely and completely violating your freedom of expression, right? When it comes to writing out a petition. And that's actually a prayer and a personal statement, right? They're making it so that you have to ask for something. You will ask for it like this, you know, please, sir, can I have some more? Right? We're not going to acknowledge that we understand the English language or what you're asking for unless you say, we want the government to change the law on, pig farming, right? You can't say, don't you think the law on pig farming should be different? Or, we think the current law on pig farming is erroneous or in error, right? So, well, what does that mean? Well, obviously it means that you want the government to take a look at it, right? And if you put a load of facts and evidence underneath, attached to that statement, clearly, right, that is to show that the reasons why you think that it's erroneous. I mean, the government's there to debate policy. So obviously it's a no-brainer. That's a freedom of expression, right? Now, the e-petitions committee are completely and absolutely violating this freedom of expression. And I would also add this as well. When now that everything's on social media, and now they're putting these questionnaires up there, right? Notice that YouTube or Facebook might ask you a question and they'll give you 3 answers, right? But you can't actually write what you want a lot of the times. They're asking you questions and you can choose, you're only allowed to choose what questions they have. And then when you put your answers, you're not actually writing your own answer, right? They're putting 3 answers, A, B, or C, right? Or 5 stars, how much do you think our performance is? Good, very good, poor, terrible, or, exceptional, or whatever. And you can only allow to respond, right, by what they say you can respond in. So when someone asks you a question, how did you feel about our service, right? Well, instead of actually being able to freely express what you think to their service, you're only allowed to respond with, well, your service was poor, average, or exceptional, right? Which means that you haven't got any freedom of expression because you're only allowed to use 3 different words to explain or describe what you thought to the service, right? That's not freedom of expression, right? Well, then they might say, well, it gives you expression so it can be kind of like generally average, positive or negative, right? But that's still, that is still not freedom of expression, because what it does is it actually reduces a subjective thing to a kind of it's like when they call it a rating or a graph or whatever, right? Rate our service out of 10. Even then you're reducing it to numbers, right? So you're converting what did you think to our service or business, right? If you can only have 3 answers like poor, average, or exceptional, right? That is removing the entire experience, right? And it's actually putting it into like a statistic. It's converting it into a statistical interpretation, right? It doesn't actually describe the experience that you had, whether I found your, like, let's say, for example, you went to a restaurant and you were intimidated when you were there, or you were frightened. Now, how is that going to interpret you in whether you can have, poor, average or exceptional. Well, you won't put exceptional, you won't put average, but you'll put poor. But why? This you had a negative experience. That explains nothing, right? It doesn't explain anything. Or it's just negative, negative for what reason? The food made you sick, or you didn't like, the atmosphere in there, or whatever. So all these, but this is what they're doing nowadays. It's all this automated, and this is how they want every single thing that you do just to be like some kind of McDonald's menu, and you just, press select what they offer, their questions and their answers. So freedom of expression and thought is actually getting the religion, right? Freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Well, they actually are preventing people from practicing the religion. The thing with the prayers aspect is that people don't usually pray unless it's a certain occasion, like if there's been a birth, a death, or a marriage, right? Most people, unless you are a Christian who goes to church on an extremely regular basis, right? What we call Christians who are just extremely general Christians, right? The few occasions when they might put their hands together and pray might be at a funeral service. That's when someone's dying or passing from the world, or if there's a christening or birth, or if there's a marriage, right? If they sing songs at the marriage service, right? And the thing with abortion clinics is it is one of those three, because it is to do with deaths, right? You pray when someone or something is dying, whether or not even if it might be intimidating the people who are going for the abortion or not. I mean, I'm not advocating that there should be all these people lined up outside abortion clinics if people are going there, right? I just merely said that, if they had kind of like anonymous venues and then mixed them up at random on like a circuit, so it wasn't quite sure where someone was going to be or when there was going to be there or which venue was being used, right? I mean, then the people wouldn't actually know which one to be outside when or whatever, right? And you wouldn't actually need to put laws because it just mix it up a bit. There are things like that could be done. You don't have to make someone into a criminal, because they've got a strong belief that, they should pray for these things if that's what they believe in. It does actually, it takes part of the religion away, Freedom of assembly and association. So freedom of assembly and association. They're trying to do that when you get these prescribed groups now. But we've got the right to assemble for petition anyway. They had the Seditious Meeting Acts and the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, but you could always get consent and permission to do it. The problem is now with the assemblies is they're not letting us use the official parliamentary e-petitions process to get the proper rights validated, because when you get them on that website, they're a lot easier to prove because they're on there and it's on a parliament record, right? If you're just doing it by hand or through Change.org or whatever, it's harder to validate them. And they're not even actually recognising these rights a lot of the time, privileges. So they've started letting people assemble more freely, but without the official law being attached to it or rights. So if there is an incident or if there is any trouble, people actually do end up getting arrested. So actually, even though the freedom to assemble is a lot more as it is now, we have got a lot more freedom to assemble, but it's not getting the actual appropriate law attached to it, ironically. So when you do, and if there's a problem, you're not actually getting the full and proper protection, because they're actually removing that instead of actually restricting the assemblies heavily like they did with the Seditious Meetings Act and Tumultuous Petitioning Act and various other acts. What they're actually doing instead is they're actually restricting and letting you use the right, letting you start the petition up, or at least on the website, not obviously in paper, but that it's more. Maybe you shouldn't want to do it on digital. Maybe you're just happy with the traditional way of doing it. But they've taken the court process away. That's the thing. They've taken that consent proceedings away, so you can't go to the court and get it official, because if you went to that court, you could get it officially recognised and acknowledged, right? And the suffragettes were not bothering to do that. And what they were instead, they were really trying to push the boundaries of, assembling outside Parliament, the numbers of people outside Parliament to present the petitions. They really wanted to push the boundaries on that through that act, when part of the act was not being enforced, but that part was. So the suffragettes had an issue with that Tumultuous Petitioning Act, and its contradictory effects to the Bill of Rights. But we don't even have that Tumultuous Act anymore. But it's not giving you... Well, the rights meant to be constitutionally recognised anyway, but it's not getting constitutionally recognised. So the assemblies, the physical aspect of the assemblies is hypothetically freer, but the actual law part of it is more restrictive, because they're not acknowledging that it applies or that it's in use. Particularly when there's any incidents. Right to privacy. Well, that is already that is a joke. All these mobile phones are getting you to consent, submit, and accept, and not have privacy. They're all effectively using adware that stalks your personal data, locations, thoughts, things that you're planning. It's full on stalking. And that's no right to privacy. Right, if the main global companies that the majority of people use, like Facebook, YouTube, and X and Google, if Google is a service that the majority of people in the country use, like more than 50% of them, right, and that in order to use it, you have to consent, submit, and accept to give up your privacy. You haven't got any. Now, if you've got 3 or 4 companies that by the time they're finished, they've got everyone to consent, submit, and accept to relinquish their privacy to those companies, you don't have any. Now, the fact that they're not really giving you any option, you can't use their services, would mean that you're being excluded from their services. You're being excluded from engaging in social media because you don't agree with these things that take away your privacy. So the privacy's gone. I mean, Tony Blair's digital ID seeks to get rid of that. And this is what I'm saying. This was never a list of human freedoms for the future. This was never planned. It cannot have been planned to be, this is the list of freedoms that we want people to have. What this actually is, and what it always was a list of things that are going to get in the way of the Fabian's plans, Tony Blair's future plans, his digital ID plan, because his digital ID plan cannot be implemented while these exist, because they all serve to an obstruction to his plan, like with China, right? With the whole social points. And in fact, if you've got social points, have you got freedom of expression? Because, if you get angry and you get banned, you weren't free to express yourself because there was a penalty for doing that, right? We don't, the whole social media, social points, I don't have freedom of expression, so right to privacy is gone. And in fact, I uploaded a video privately to YouTube, which did not harm anyone. It didn't have any harm to anyone. And I got my channel suspended, and that was even private, and there wasn't any right to privacy on that. Right to a nationality. Well, they getting rid of the nationalities. They've done. This is what we're talking about now. My opinion on that is that, let's go back 5 or 10 years, right, before all this current issue kicked off. We'd we've got a mixed culture. You know, we've got BBC TV programmes with, you know, all different types of ethnicities and religions, right? There wasn't a problem with it. What they're doing now is they're trying to, it's like arranged marriage. It's forced now. What they're doing now is that they're you know, we did accept other cultures and religions and, you know, extremely tolerant of them and, in fact, getting on with them, right? I mean, but now it's like they're wanting to, by the time they've forced a mix-up of nationalities, then you don't end up with separate nationalities and it all becomes one nationality. So it's the right to a nationality. Does that say the right to an individual nationality? But nationality is that there are different nations. That's why it's called the United Nations. But that's one nation. Are they saying that there's a right to one nationality and they're only going to want there to be one nationality and that is planet Earth, right? If that's where they're heading, and if they're going to argue that, well, we said that you got a right to nationality, it's called planet Earth, right? That's like, oh, right, you got us there. We thought that you meant, you know, you got the right to retain your nationality of your own country. So, you know, that's another thing. They've got to be getting that they don't want. This was never a list of rights and freedoms to retain. This was like, okay, these are all the obstructions to our corporate business plan and globalist agenda, right? And, you know, and that's why they set them out in a very vague and loose way. So, in fact, you couldn't argue and interpret them. In fact, when that freedom of expression clause, right, you always had to argue that, you know, when you've got a law that says you've got the freedom of expression, but every single time that you've got to use it, it's extremely vague, you're having to argue that you've got the right to freedom of expression under very loose terms, like, you know, YouTube policy, which isn't even clear. And it's like any reason or no reason, they can just, you know, use it. And they don't actually have to explain themselves or reply to you, which, you know, how is that the right to understand and the right to be understood? YouTube policy takes away the right to understand and the right for you to be understood by YouTube because they don't want to speak to you and they don't want anyone to talk to you, right? Economic, social, or cultural rights. Right to adequate standard of living. Now, the thing with adequate standard of living is that what we found is that all these, they consider like Subways, McDonald's and Starbucks to be the standard, right? They think that that is the standard, not like, you know, an allotment or something with loads of vegetables growing your own food, right? Their idea of this standard of living is that, you know, you've got a fancy new town centre with all these shops, Starbucks, Subways and that you've got money to afford them, and that's increased your standard of living. But as it turns out, actually all these foods have been, you know, not nourishing the microbiome, and they actually haven't really been nourishing anyone, right? They're affecting overall intellectual performance and things like that. And actually they've found out now that all fast food is really bad for us, right? So it's not actually a good standard. What it is it's a convenient regime that they can extract money out of us and actually get people to obey them, you know, like the staff in McDonald's when the things are going beep, 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 you know, open the microwave, empty the thing. It's a machine. They're making people more into behaviour like machines rather than people. And in fact, they're trying to get rid of the people, right? You know, if you've got a right to adequate standard of living, wouldn't you think that a good standard of living would be, you know, to socialise and speak, you know, when you get your food, not have a digital screen there where you just press the buttons and it's like some animated, you know, AI thing. Is that a good standard of living? Is it healthy? You know, is it healthy, real, true relationships and understanding of humans, or is it like, you know, there's that aspect to it as well. A right to education. Well, this is the thing. So, the right to education, they did all this freedom of information plan. the Freedom of Information plan was that, we could ask the government anything or get any information from the government. I actually find that all the main articles that I really, really need to get are, you have to go to National Archives or to a university, or like on that ProQuest thing's got all the really, important ones that you need, and all the ones that are up on the government websites are usually the ones that were less important, right? It's been awkward to get to the information that I want. And the plan was always for our personal information to be free to these big companies and them to make money out of it, right? Notice that we can't get... YouTube won't answer anything. YouTube, Google and Facebook won't tell you anything. They don't want you to know who their staff are, what they're doing or anything. So it started out as open information about a government to make it to get us, to make it look like information was going to be free, and now it's turned out so that they just wanted our information about us freely, and we aren't having any information about their companies, right, or businesses. And I'm sure that companies and businesses did used to get freedom of information requests earlier on, but then for some reason they made it out that you can't get them from private companies. I don't know what happened. Something happened, but people were asking companies, how many products do you make or whatever. I remember seeing those requests, and now you don't see any of them, trying to make out that private companies don't have to give information over. So, and also what I'm finding is that now that we can get information and now that we can research knowledge, you can really use that to point out government malpractices or point out the government have got things wrong or are doing things wrong. But now what I've found out is that they're trying to block you and obstruct you from being successful in proving that. So like with the e-petitions is a really good way, or through the ombudsman or whatever, right? But the ombudsman, you've got to get the MP to sign it, right? And then you've got like all these complaints companies, like the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the Advertising Standards Authority. They never act. They never do anything. They've got all these reports on things that they do, but they're extremely... I don't think that the reality is that they're actually doing that much for people. It's all strategic. That's under a policy and strategy directive. It's not like, this is really hurting me or upsetting me, please make it stop. Oh, sorry, sir, right, this advertisement's distressing me, please, make them stop. They won't do anything. It's extremely under a corporate directive style operation, just like Ofcom is as well, and all the staff, the staff training now is really to, I was speaking to the Solicitors Regulation Authority the other day, and he was really trying to reason it out. He didn't want to act against the solicitor that I complained on, and he was trying to make excuses up, and he wasn't being impartial. I had to remind him of impartiality, and actually speaking to him on the phone and his attitude, he was automatically really kind of like, it's like if you've got a ball and you roll it, right, but if you've got a weight inside the ball and it's, inclined to, go to one side, if you roll the ball, it's always going to roll to one side and not roll straight, right? And that's what this guy was like. He was like, he's constantly trying to... Now, if they're doing that all the time, then they're constantly trying to get complaints to go the way they want or to go a certain way, right? And that's not impartial. And that's how the government, unfortunately, is with their political parties. And with e-petitions now, in the 1832 report on public petitions, this George Strickland guy, he was saying that there wasn't one petition that he didn't contrive a way to get presented, which meant that he was actually, really working on behalf of his constituents. So he claims, right? And now, I don't think there's hardly any petition which the e-petitions committee have contrived a way to reject, right? I mean, they're contriving a way to reject all of them. And it's in their interpretation of the policy, right? When you interpret that actual policy clearly, but apply it to the fact and truth of the law and certain acts and what it actually says in the HC papers, right? There's a lot of admissibility, right? But if you ignore all those and just make presumptions and generalities, then you can use those policy clauses and actually, it's almost like, and you can contrive a way to apply those policy clauses to block things if you contrive narrowly and omit a lot of facts, right, from the interpretation process, right? Which means that, they're very much like that Solicitor Regulation Authority guy who was trying to argue it. He's trying to argue it out, but they're saying they're not. They're saying, no, we're impartial, but they're not impartial. They're getting influenced by the MPs and by other staff, and they're habitually now trying to, argue it out. And also that they're really making out that they can't understand it. When it's clearly, if you can understand the English language, right, you can either read or you can't, okay? If I open the dictionary and I flick through it and I pick any word at random, right, it tells you what the word means, but most people already know what that word means, right? People know the English language, right? You know what it means when you construct a sentence, right? If you say, I want to walk up the stairs, right? A person can understand that. And if they speak English, when you ask them a question, do you speak English? They say, yeah, right? And from that point on, when you start talking, they've informed you that they can understand you. Now, either they can or they can't. So when you say, I'd like to get to the top of the stairs, right? They understood what you just said, okay? Now, that's it. Now, once you are writing in that language, right, it's acknowledged that you're going to understand it. So when you're writing these petitions and this team is saying, we don't know what you're asking, but it's in English, right? And then if they can read it if you say, well, can you read it back to me, right? And say, well, you understood it because you just read it to me, okay? Can you understand what this word means? Can you understand? If you ask them individually what each of the words mean, right? And then the sentence, right? This sentence says, I believe that the government policy on, tourism, is erroneous. Say, right, what do the words mean when you say, I believe that the government policy on tourism is erroneous, right? This thing, it's like, what am I talking about? Tourism. Did you just understand that I'm talking about tourism? Yes. Did you understand that I'm accusing the government of having an erroneous policy? Yes, right? Right. So, and underneath is some evidence substantiating that. Oh, what do you want me to fucking do about it? Well, why are we here? We're asking the government to what is your job? It's like working in an ice cream van and saying, what am I here to do? Provide food. It's like, we believe the government policy on tourism is defective, and underneath is pointing out the clauses on why, right? Well, what are you supposed to do about it? Well, fix them. Why? What is e-petitions for, right? A redress, right, to fix a problem. So you come there with problems or issues. You don't have to ask for anything, because it's like going to B&Q, right? If you go to B&Q with a bag of nails, right, and you go to the counter for returns, right? I'm at the return counter in B&Q, right? At the top, it says returns, right? And I got a bag of nails, right, and a receipt, and I put it on the desk, right? Now, this is the problem with the petitions committee in Parliament, right? Right? What do you, it's like, right, what do you put it on the desk, right? So it's like, there's a bag of nails, right? So you're returning them, right? You're returning the nails, they're faulty, right? Now, there are only two things that you can do. Either, do you want a refund, sir? Or would you like a different bag of nails, right? So there are two options, but it can only either be that you want your money back, there's only two possibilities that can occur, which is either, you want the money back, or you want a different bag, a brand new one, because it's broken or faulty, right? Because why would you be in B&Q and why would you be stood at the returns counter? Okay? And that's what happens. People just don't speak. They just put it there, and then the person picks up, looks at the receipt, and, they just go and, put it through or whatever. Unless, A or B, whatever. Now, this is the thing with petitions. It's like, I'm at Parliament, it's a Parliament service, so it's about, legislation and governance in England, right? And we're at petitions, which is meant to be, but what is that for? Redress of grievances, have you read history books or it's like saying what's petitioning, right? Now, when you go there and you put on the desk, right, here's the, government policy for tourism, like, it's fucked, right? It's knackered, right? Well, sorry, sir, would you like a refund, or would you like us to fix, like a functional policy, one that works properly, right? Well, you make your mind up. I don't mind, really, this is the thing. What do you think that one? It's like, what is this? What does it say? It's like, we believe that the tourism policy is erroneous. It's not working properly. That's the, it's a claim, right? We believe that this is wrong, right? Well, does anyone know what you're asking? Well, put it right. Put it right. What do you mean, what am I asking? Is it what we're here for? To correct things, to correct law, to correct things. Why would I be here? Why would I make a claim? It's like court, There are so many different things that you can do in courts, right? You can claim money, you can go to the High Courts of Justice, right? And you can say that, we think that the current law, on pony fields or whatever, is wrong, and that these ponies have got a right to roam freely or whatever. This is the thing. What's the claim? We think that ponies have a right to roam freely. It's a claim, right? And what would the evidence be to prove that they can roam freely? Well, what are you asking? Well, agree with me, agree with us, or disagree. What is the verdict? Agree or disagree? This is the thing. But the thing with Parliament is they're wanting to say, they want, make it so we can smoke inside, right? But they're not wanting you to write, smoking, forbidding smoking indoors, has affected, people's social gatherings. People aren't gathering socially anymore, sitting down to have a smoke, it's detrimental. You could pose anything. You're framing something. You are framing a claim or juxtaposing a position on something. You see, you are allowed to ask the government for their position on something through a petition. That there's so much you can do, but this team has narrowed it down so that they're not allowing you to have this freedom of expression, which means that they're not allowing you to actually make use of the service properly. They're trying to make out that they can't understand English, and that, why would you be there? If I've got a problem, why would someone be here with a problem? What do you want us to do about it? Fix it? That would be a start. There's someone here with a problem. All they've done is, put a problem on the desk. We don't understand what you want us to do. Well, just do nothing. Well, no, they want the problem fixed. Right to education. And also, a right to education includes to learn. Education is to be able to learn. How can you learn about someone's petition if you can't ask them about it or talk about it? And they're forbidding people making contact and speaking to them. And this is the thing: that falls in the right to understand and the right to be understood. But also, they've got the petitioners have got a policy which goes against the standing orders powers, right? The standing orders powers are to make use of those powers in order to make sure that it's understood and that they understand it, but then the policy is telling them not to understand it and for it not to be understood. So it's actually anti-education. And when it comes to education, they're only wanting people to learn what they want them to learn. Right to work and to rest and leisure. Well, this is the thing. Notice, right, it says here there's a right to work and rest and leisure. Well, they took the Sunday away, which was the day of rest, okay? People have got a right to their dinner breaks and lunch breaks and so forth, right? And a right to, have fun. But if this fully automated AI and machine reality comes in, then they're not going to need people to work. Now, are they going to eventually say that we don't want humans working there? Only machines can, and then you don't have a right to work, or we don't need you to work. Whatever. There's no requirement for you to work. So this goes back. If you take into account this Tony Blair implementation thing and Bill Gates and the whole thing, it's actually going to remove the requirement to work. So if there's a right to, if they let's use this idea for this like satellite guided vehicles. So with the satellite guided vehicles, with all these lorries and HGV that they're not going to have any human drivers, right? Well, is there going to be a right for people to work as a driver once they replace them all? And then when they replace all the lorries and that, are they going to say, that, all the other vehicles have to be satellite controlled as well, and humans aren't allowed to make, freedom of expression in their driving and so forth? So, the right to work, I think the way they're wanting to go with these satellite guided vehicles and, guided vehicles is going to get rid of the right to, they won't have anyone working as drivers because, all the trains and the buses and everything, if they're all controlled, there won't be a right to work and they'll actually disallow you from working as a driver. And then once all these vehicles are taking up the main highways and motorways and roads, right, will you have a right to drive for leisure, right? Are you going to have a right to drive for leisure? Because people like to drive for leisure, or do you have to go to the Isle of Man, or maybe you only got a right to drive for leisure if you're going to the countryside far away from the main A roads and highways where they've got all these satellite guided things. So I think that's an obstruction to their plan as well. The right to participate, the right to work, rest and leisure. The right to social security, well, is that trying to make, the security that they're putting on the funds? But this is the thing, the right to social security is okay, but have you got the right not to have social security? What I've noticed now is whenever I go on my computer, I've got to have my phone with me to go on most websites. If I don't have my phone with me, I cannot use my main normal computer. It's like I've got to have this digital phone, this digital ID card with me all the time, or I can't even do anything, let alone with the phone itself, but even on any other computer or machine I've got an account with, right? So if I went on holiday and didn't have my smartphone with me, and I just went on a computer somewhere, I wouldn't actually be able to use it because you're getting all the security things to your phone, right? So the right to social security, it's not like a right. They're forcing a new world order of security on you that you must have it. It's not like a right to have it. It's like, you don't have a right not to have it. So something strange, that clause is very concerning and peculiar when it comes to what they're implementing, because you wouldn't have a right to not have this phone tech security implementations in every single thing you do, right? So that would be forced on you, and it already is, because we're consent submitting and accepting. And I don't think it's a security. I think it is going back up to that clause on slavery, freedom from slavery and torture. I think this social security thing is taking away your right from freedom and torture. I'm being tortured from these advertisements on YouTube. The YouTube advertisements, right, are torturing me. I'm actually getting that they're actually upsetting me, and they're stalking me and spying on me and what I'm doing, and then they're like mocking and coming up, and I can't afford to pay for Go free on Google, so I'm actually getting tortured by these adverts now, and also it's a form of harassment, and they're actually trying to make you put up with that, and it also then is like. It's a new AI digital bullying system where they're saying, well, it's not, Neil Mohan's fault or Sergey Brin's. It was the algorithm. It was just, it was the system, the computer that's doing it. You can't actually blame the creator. It's almost like, that they don't blame God, don't blame the Lord, it's like, Sergey Brin's system, it's his new Skynet consciousness's fault, not him, the person who designed it or programmed it, because he's exempted from all prosecutions, like Section 230, in America, which does not actually apply in England. So where are we down? Right to participate in culture and life. In cultural life, right to participate in cultural life and share in scientific advancement. Well, there's not a right to do it. That if you're looking at third world countries like Africa, right, and if no one is providing them with computers or providing them with technology, right, and they say, well, they can't afford it, they should be allowed to afford it, or it should be affordable. But that's at one end of the spectrum. We've got to the point now where you can't not have it. It's not to do with the right to participate in cultural life and share in scientific advancement. They're not sharing scientific advancement now. Scientific advancement is being you don't have a choice in it. And this is what I've said. There's nothing democratic about AI, and there's nothing democratic about anything that Elon Musk or Sergey Brin or YouTube, Google or Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook are doing. It is not democratic. In fact, technocracy, the technocrats are not. It's not democracy. Technocracy is not democracy. You don't get to vote or decide. I mean, some of these AGM people do, but they only get to vote on shareholder decisions. They definitely they can't vote down not to continue with the technology, right? It's like it's a dictate. We've already entered a technocratical dictatorship. It's not democratical, so it's going to take over the democracy. It's actually going to break down and take away the democracy, which is what this is all about. Writing off this list. This is like Tony Blair's Christmas list of what he needs to get rid of to do his plan. Right? You can't have You can't have this plan that any of the technological companies are wanting to do, because none of it involves our decision, and you don't even get to if you say that the consent, accept, submit is your own personal decision, you don't have, you are going to be excluded, right? If you do not consent, submit to their control, accept their policies, which are not laws that we made, they conjured them up, you will be excluded socially, and you will be excluded technologically from what is going on, right? Because you do not accept consent and submit to their will, to their control, to their rulership, right? Now, you don't actually have a decision in that. It's like you either consent, submit, accept, right? Or you don't have the technology, right? So it's like, it's a joke to say that, Africa or, Australia in the outback or whatever, it has a right to participate in this technology, we now, once you've got your phones on Google, and once you've got your emails on Google, and once you're using Google products, and, it turns out your phone was Google, even though it had a different company name, and, you didn't even know that it was Google, how can you get off Google? It's like a virus. It's extremely difficult to get rid of it, because I've got a lot of important emails, right, that I need, and, how can I get off Google, change my email address, which people have got that email address, how can I stop them using it and change it when I've already submitted things, It's very difficult to get it off, to get rid of it. So it's extremely difficult not to participate, and it's extremely difficult to leave the participation. And then, if you've got these mobile phones, right, and all this consent, submit, accept, if you don't consent, submit, accept, and if you don't have a mobile phone, someone else has. And someone else will. So if you've got friends and you want to have friends and they've got a house, they've got the devices and they've consented, submitted, and accepted that it will listen to every conversation, whether you've consented to it or not, and whether you have a device or not. So it's infiltrated the whole room, it's infiltrated all your friends, it's infiltrated everything, and someone's consented, submitted, and accept to it. So to say that African people have got a right to be included in that, they'd be hard pushed not to get included in it. In fact, they can run, and they can run run, Forrest, run. They can run as fast as they can, but you can't catch me. But he's the technology man, can. This is the thing. Run Elon Musk's Starlink thing, which is going to, link everyone over the whole planet, right? Run away from that. So there is no choice. There is no right to participate. If you do not participate, someone else will, right? If you don't, then if we can't get you, we'll get your friends or your family, right? There is no option. When there is no option to not consent, submit, accept, and even if you manage to, not buy a mobile phone at all and do this thing where, I'm not going to use social media, I'm just going to walk in the countryside. When you walk in the countryside, someone who walks past you will have consented, submitted, and accepted. When you go to a countryside pub, all the people in the pub, likely they will have consented, submitted, and accepted to this new authority and power, and your conversations will be listened to. There's no right to do it. There's no the right. You were very hard pushed to have a right not to participate in it now. So I think the African people or people in Australia or in the jungle in South America are lucky while they last, because they can't. It's inevitable. And when it's inevitable and there's no vote on it, and Elon Musk says, only the wise should make decisions. Well, you're not going to, I love that coming from Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk, only the wise should make decisions. Well, that's a decision that I'd love to not be able to make, not to consent, submit, and accept to his freaking policy, right? Hey, look, here's a new Elon Musk phone and, system, right? Only the wise can make decisions. Well, let me choose not to consent, submit, and accept. Oh, no, I'm sorry, you can't have that decision. Well, what are the options? Consent, submit, and accept. Oh, right. So, or you're not going to use it, right? Well, I'll decide not to use it then. Well, tough, because everyone else in the room has chosen to consent, submit, and accept. So I'll still listen to you anyway, right? So where's the choice in there? There is no choice. These people, it's not even a war, right? In a war, at least you can fight, right? At least in a war, right? If you can, if you've got two people who both got a gun, you can fight, right? If you've got two people who both got fists, you can wrestle, right? There is no, you will consent, submit, accept, right? Or you will not be included. You will not, and even if you can't not be included, because your friends will include you in our master plan, whether you like it or not. I don't really know how Elon Musk even could start a political party, because a political party means that you have to vote for it. I'm quite surprised that, well, this is the thing, it's almost kind of like, I think we're at the stage now where you've got to look at the polling station and the voting a little bit like your mobile phone agreement. It's like, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to consent, submit and accept, you know, Donald Trump or Biden or RFK Jr. or Elon Musk, right? You know, it's like the Highlander. In the end, there can only be one, but there is going to be one, whether you like it or not. You know what I mean? It's like, well, actually, no, I won't actually vote, you know? Bull, you know, the whole world's in turmoil and we're going to put pressure on you to vote for something, you know, like, or else, you know, like even if it's Nigel Farage or whatever. It's like, what people should be doing is don't turn up to vote and don't vote for these people, right? Don't vote for any of them. Don't vote because they don't deserve the vote and they shouldn't have the vote because they're not giving us any options at all, right? I wouldn't vote for them. But the problem is, you know, if you don't vote for them, someone else is going to, right? So, and that's the trap we're in now with this. And in order to solve the problem, we even need to vote for completely independent people. But that's almost like saying, you know, what other options are there besides Facebook, YouTube, and Google? They defeated all the other competition. You know, Amazon, Jeff Bezos. You know, there is no other option, right? Where's the vote not for this technological outcome? And then Elon Musk will say, oh, it's this destiny. Well, that's it. These people, right, it's not democracy. It is the destiny of mankind. It's fate and destiny. And these people have got control of it. And I don't even think they're in control of themselves. They're saying like, you know, well, you know, technology is the future. It's like a religion, you know, technology is the future. What else could there be? You know, we need AI, we're going to have these power stations, we need to get this, you know, show off the ground, you know, and, you know, it's inevitable. Like, so they actually, it's almost like in an Islamic belief where there's this, like, the Shiva's dancing the dance, or there's this ongoing process through God, which, you know, cannot, there's no option. It's automated. It's these people believe in fully automated reality. They believe that nothing is left to chance, right? Every single thing. They don't actually believe in the toss of the dice and the 50-50 chance that it could land either side. It's like they want to make sure that, you know, you're not going to win the lottery. You're not going to manage to not consent to their policies and get a group of friends who haven't either and live in some nice allotment commune in the countryside in a nice village somewhere with freedom of expression, right? It's like, you know, you're going to be included in this digital matrix with Starlink, right? And that is what is going to happen. We're dictating it now. Where the profits, there is no alternative option. And that is not democracy or vote. That means we're already under a military regime, and therefore it cannot. When you use the word regime, you usually attach the word military. But I think we need to forget about the military part of it now. The whole tanks, bomb, guns, fighter jets, drones. You know, I think that it's clear now that the regime is a technological regime. And it does not have to be labelled, described or itemised as a military regime. It merely is described as a technological regime, which does not require military, because you will consent and submit, accept, and even if you don't, you will be included in it anyway, whether you like it or not. And that's inevitable, and there won't be a vote on it. In fact, if you don't vote against it, everyone else has, right? So this is completely and utterly against all this, you know, freedom of expression and the rest of it. Because, you know, even in Scotland, you haven't got the freedom of expression in your house anymore, right? You can't say what you want in your house in Scotland, right? So, you know, right to education, security, participate in cultural life, science. So the right to participate in cultural life, well, you know, I used to think the word cultural meant like if you had the cultural quarter, it was the historic quarter, but the historic quarter is the historic quarter. The cultural quarter is where you experiment and encounter and taste different cultures. Like, you know, you've got, Little Germany, or, you know, the, you know, Chinese, like, you know, or whatever, whether it's Soho or something like that, right? Like Bristol is very cultural. That means that, you know, like when they used to have London and they used to have all the, you know, merchants, you know, Silk Road or whatever. It's like by the time they're finished, there won't be a cultural quarter where you can go and experience culture and the right to experience different culture. it's like the whole thing is going to be multicultural, which is where you lose your identity of a nationality, right? And then there won't be a right to experience culture. You'll be had. This is what Tony Robinson's kicking off about now, and all these people with the immigration, and that Fast Performance channel. By the time that they've finished, we'll be lucky to have the right to experience our own nationality, right? Our nationality will become just merely a cultural minority, right? And then the majority will be what they call a cultural mix. So then what you're actually creating is a multicultural society where you don't have a nationality, because you're transforming the nationality into a minority cultural experience, and you're making the mixed multicultural merge of nationalities the main nationality, which is one global nationality, which is what Tony Blair wanted to do, and it doesn't actually preserve. It's a threat to nationalities, right? Because it reduces them to minority cultures in any given place. So that is taken from this as well. Universality. Human rights apply to everyone, everywhere. Well, they're getting rid of most of these. Human rights apply to everyone, everywhere. The only thing that applies to everyone, everywhere is consent, submit, and accept on the smartphone now. It's going to apply to everyone, everywhere, no matter what country you're in, what room you're in, what Starlink, even if you're in the middle of Algeria, in the desert or whatever, Elon Musk's going to be waving down from heaven like God, in a cloud, like, hey, there's a Starlink here, or whatever. Well, I'm looking for some water. My mouth's dry. Well, it's it's like a little parachute comes down from heaven above, from God. Elon Musk's Starlink, fires you a bottle of Evil water. I've been bless Allah. It's like Elon Musk. And I was in the middle of Algeria in a desert. And there is nothing for 100 miles in every direction. So Elon Musk's Starlink parachute me down water from the heavens, bless the Lord. I could have done with a Fanta, but he give me an Evian water. This is where Elon Musk's going with it. Human rights apply to everyone, everywhere. Well, they're getting rid of all these human rights. This is the junk list. This is the scrap list. This is like, we need to get rid of all these things because we're not going to be able to do our technocracy if these things continue to exist, right? We're not going to be able to do it. So we have to make this list, and we'll make them all vague, and then we'll make people have to argue for them in the courts, because all these things that we're going to bring in are going to be writing them off. So we're going to have to make it like the YouTube policy, where they're so vague that, it's hard to define them anymore, and you've got to stand up and argue them in the courts anymore because it's not even detailed in codified law. Equality and non-discrimination. All people are born free and equal and should... Well, that is joke, isn't it? All people are born free and equal. All people are born equal. Like says Mark Zuckerberg sat at a meal with Trump, right? Boasting about how he's, chucking around these 80 billion, and he's just pissed off that he can't say it's 80 trillion, because then, he would be the president himself, not Trump, like the government's money kicking around the trillions, right? Everyone is equal, Mark, well, isn't, Mark's 80 billion, we made another 80 billion out of crap adverts that we made people listen to, for wasted, 20 minutes of their time, separated through, 5-second intervals or whatever, and it was absolutely complete and utter pointless waste of time. And in fact, it was distressing me and causing me anxiety, right? All equality, all people are born free and unequal as well, right? I'm free. Free from what? All people are born free from a device which they had to consent, submit, and accept to all policies, taking away their privacy, and if they didn't agree to it, then someone else did, right? Which takes their privacy away. So, what absolute tosh. They must have thought we were born yesterday with this. They must have thought Tony Blair, right, must think that we are absolutely fucking retarded and dumb. This is his Christmas wish list. Blow out the candles. Blow them out, Tony. You know, poof, piff, paff, poof, gone. This is Tony Blair's bucket list, right? This is Blair's bucket list, right? To get rid of. And if Jonathan M. Fuller or Extinction Rebellion or anyone, right, believes this was ever the list of human rights to preserve, they must be fools. They must be fools, right? Because, you know, we're creating equals, you know. Now, you know, John's got 50 billion followers, and, you know, Maria, she's got 1 million followers and fans. Now we're all socially equal. Hey, look, it's Elon Musk. He's got 20 billion followers now. And when he has a chocolate milkshake, they even tell everyone on the news, you know. If I had a chocolate milkshake, you know, they don't tell everyone unless, you know, I do something and then it's on the front cover of the newspaper because the newspaper knew about it and been listening and been winding us up. This is the thing, right? You know, what absolute tosh is this, right? What absolute tosh. This is scandalous. You know, these aren't ever intended to be human rights at all whatsoever. And what's the next one? Inalienability. These rights cannot be taken away. Right? Inalienability. Well, you know, they used to not even allow aliens in the country. Aliens are meant to be people from outside, you know, your country or culture. They're not allowed in the country. Now they're coming all over on boats. We can't keep them out of there. Inalienability. This is the thing. We've actually got like these big corporate entities who are just bossing us now. They're not even applying the law of the country. They've got their own policy which overreaches the law, and they're forcing it on us. The Americans. We're under attack by the Americans. We're under attack by YouTube, Facebook, and Google. As Google's, we're investing money in this country. No. If Google is investing money in this country in AI, 3 billion, right, he's already overreaching our laws. Our government have welcomed him in and are not taking legal action against him. They like it. So he's an invitation. It's like Prince Orange. You know, I was being invited over to take over the government, but unfortunately, we haven't invited in William Orange to give us the Bill of Rights, you know, and the right to petition. It's like, you know, Sergey Brin is invited in with his overreaching policy, which is taking away all our rights, you know, because, you know, we can't, if we retain any of these rights, then it writes off their technocracy plan, which we're all going to have to comply with anyway. And if we don't, someone else will, right? So it's just tosh. You know, Sergey Brin is an invader in this country. He is enforcing a policy through an American Section 230 law, which doesn't apply here. And he's making me do things which aren't English law, right? Imposing an authority on us because, you know, I started using his, you know, equipment ages ago, when he didn't have all these, you know, submit, consent, subagree, and accept. And if I don't submit, consent, and accept, I'm going to lose all my data and emails and things. And then he's taken all my things, history, and so forth. And they're also making money and profit out of our kind of like leisure time ideas. I don't know how this is even going to work for intellectual property, right? Because these people are actually getting the entire country to sign over any intellectual property that they might think of, conceive, or come up with, right? In conversation or ideas. And the phone's listening to it and even using AI to bounce off those ideas and come up with ideas. So it's like you won't have any ideas that are going to have a big business plan, because any idea that can possibly had, which could be triggered from you talking about it, they immediately own that, and then their own AI comes up with a product and then puts it on a manufacturing line, and then they're wanting you to buy it. So they make you say something. Oh, wouldn't it be a good idea, you know, if Hawaiian shirts were cool? You'll never make any money from saying that or thinking it, no matter how much of a Dragon's Den business person you are, because these people's automated machines are already going to have it, dispensed at the local shop by the time you get there, and then you're going to buy it. So I thought of a great idea would be cool. Oh, that's great. We can make money out of that, and if you pay us some money, and we'll give you it. Well, actually, no, I want to make money out of it. Well, no, we can't be having that because we're taking over the world. This is the thing. This list is their bucket list, right? It's like, these are the things we need to get rid of, right? Or else we can't do what we're planning. So, Jonathan M. Fuller, it's a losing battle. Because what they did is they invented these rights and they made them so vague that it's very hard to prove that you've got them. In fact, and notice everything that they're doing is taking away these rights. So starting with, prayers and, the privacy and your own conversation without, phone listening in. They're taking these away, and notice that how they're getting you to try and defend yourself is with this big, vague thing, like everyone's got the freedom of expression, when they can't possibly have the freedom of expression, or you'll be able to tell what jokes you want and say what you want in your house in Scotland. So they're taking it away. And then now you've even got Nigel Farage and Suella Braverman saying, no, we're going to scrap the Human Rights Act, which they never intended to keep it in the first place, right? So the Human Rights Act, what you've got to understand, it is attacking and taking away the idea of codified law, because they don't want codified law. What they want is, hey, wouldn't it be great if the government is like YouTube, right? And it says that we've got this policy and it's not really exactly clear, but if we don't like it, we're going to tell you to stop fucking doing it, right? And if you don't, we'll just physically stop you from doing it and take your shit from you, right? And then if you argue with us, we're not going to even listen to you, or we're not going to enter a negotiation, right? And you're not even going to have a jury, right? Which is what they're doing with e-petitions. You don't enter into any conversation with us at all over it. So we don't have the right to be understood or to understand. And then you will consent, submit, and accept this government. At least, Harold Godwinson had a fighting chance, this is the thing, which with the monarch, at least they had to come over and, fight with, this is got to be more significant than, the Battle of Hastings. It's got to be more significant than the Roman army coming over, because our own government is, they must have welcomed it over then. And they must have welcomed it over, Prince of Orange. They must have welcomed it over, Harold Godwinson. And now Charles is like, hey, come on, take over the country. We love all these new powerful machines you've got. This is great, Everyone will consent, submit, accept. So it's the new regal authority. It's not democracy, is it? It's the equivalent of another Battle of Hastings, when the current ruler welcomes it in, So that's what Charles is doing in the government, and Starmer, they're like, hey, come into the country and take over us, come into the country, Google, and invest 20 billion. We love your way of doing things, It's like the Romans, we love the Roman ways of doing things, right? Or we love the Normans. Come over, Americans, come over, take over the country, take over democracy of the world, consent, submit, accept, people love it, they're even addicted to it, might as well be heroin, it was entertainment on my phone, what's going on, well, we're writing off our bucket list, what the fuck do you think's going on, In fact, we're halfway through writing the fucking thing off, you can't say what you want in Scotland, in your own house, you can't pray where you want, you're not going to be able to go where you want soon, and you're not even going to be able to decide whether you can submit or accept, because someone already has done for you, right? So, this, you've got to understand, European Convention on Human Rights, this is the Tony Blair bucket list, right? This cannot exist. These rights